Welcome to this conversation. Today I'm here with some of the curates from the Diocese of Montreal, past and present. And we are excited to be talking today because if you didn't already know, this year's Bishop's Action Appeal campaign is dedicated to curates and to the curacy. And for some people, that may seem like a word you've never heard before, and you may like to learn more about it. And for others, you're familiar with it, but we're going to unpack it a little bit more in terms of what actually is the lived experience of a curate, and how does this period of curacy impact their ministry. So thank you for being here to the curates. And well, I guess actually some of you are not curates, so past and present. Thank you to the clergy that are here among us today. And I'll just invite you to begin maybe with an introduction. Let's begin.
Well, my name is Precia, and I am presently priest in charge of St. George's Granby, also St. Thomas Rougemont and St. Paul Abbotsford in the Eastern Townships. And I arrived first to St. George's Granby after finishing seminary in Montreal. It was very important to me to have the experience of this time to be more, I would say that in general, when you finish seminary, you think that you're done, but actually real formation starts. And that's where I value it. I value the time that I have to figure out who really I was in ministry, what kind of ministry I was called to do. And I lived it with my community, with St. George's. This time with my community is what really shaped who I am now. And I think I learn a lot from them. And that's what I would have to put on the table in many ways. I am really grateful for the time that it was not a time of school, but it was not a time yet to be priest in charge. It was a time of figuring it out with the community, what we're both called to be together. That is my experience.
I have to say, yeah, I remember actually you and I on the phone quite a lot, Fresia, as you were in a really creative space, dreaming up all kinds of really wonderful ideas, and I would say like really alternative ways of engaging with the community. So those were really big days of creativity and dreaming, and I'll never forget that time.
You come with all the energy, with all the illusions, and you know that still you need a lot to learn. You're not there yet. And you rely on your community too. You rely on a community, and we try to figure it out together. So it's a time of formation, but a time of listening to what the call is for you and the context in which you're placed, and what the community is called to, and what we can do together. It is time of listening. It's a time of waiting to figure it out, but also it's a creative time, as you said, for new ways of expressing all the dreams that you have for the church.
Yeah, I was personally very inspired by your dreams during your time of curacy.
We first started, I have to say, to see what we had. And maybe just a story is that we didn't know exactly what we were called to be in Granby, but we had the building, and it's a beautiful building. Church is really beautiful. And that's what we had. We had to figure out our finances, but we had the building. And at that time, war started in Ukraine, and refugees started to come into Granby in the townships. And we decided that that's what we had to share it. So we started sharing the building. And it's been 3 years almost now that it's been a community of Ukrainians, and we have a Saturday school for children. So they keep on going with their language and their tradition, their food, their music, and we're having a beautiful way of interacting and actually living the gospel, living hospitality in a way that we could not even imagine before. So it's been just the fact that we were open to see what could happen with what we had and what God was calling us to be with the people around us, looking what is around us and what are the needs that we can actually accompany with. It was a beautiful experience. And now it's been 3 years. And it's been 3 years of formation, a spiritual formation for all of us.
My name is Ben. I'm currently the priest in charge of Trinity Church, St. Agatha, Grace Church in Arundel up in the Laurentians. Been there about a year, and my curacy was out in Hudson, just off the West Island of Montreal on the Ottawa River. So this was it's a beautiful town. So it's an historic Anglophone community of about 5,000 people. The parish is composed of 2 churches. So we have St. Mary's in what was the independent municipality of Como. It's now part of Hudson. And then 5 minutes down the road by car, you have St. James, which was the original building, I guess, of the parish. And St. Mary's started life as a chapel of ease for connected to St. James. And there's some funny story about how I'll probably get this wrong, but there was some landowner in Como in the must have been the mid to late 19th century, and didn't want to drive the carriage all the way down to St. James. So what do? You build a church on your land. So there are 2 churches with really deep roots in the community. And so the first theme I'll bring up with respect to my curacy then was it was a real orientation into understanding the character of a place, the character of a congregation, and the character of a parish, and the character of a town. So when I arrived, it was pandemic season, and things were more or less in lockdown. We were still going in and out. It was challenging, for sure, to establish relationships, but managed through Zoom and phone calls and meeting people online. The character of the town was, I mentioned it being a community church, community parish. So the town itself of Hudson, there's a real sense of ownership and belonging with respect to each church. There's a strong sense of kind of cultural affiliation between the church and a lot of the people in the community. And when people think of, it's not necessarily that people were coming to church every Sunday, but it was part of the fabric of the town, and the connections ran deep. Whenever there was a big public event, people would show up. So, observation, it was a really useful formation for me in learning how to, as I say, learn about the character of the town, learn about the character of the congregation, observe the dynamics in the parish. So, it was really great because I was in a parish with a mentor. I was privy to all sorts of pastoral situations, governance issues, day-to-day running of the day-to-day affairs of the parish. And certainly at the beginning of my curacy especially, a lot of that I was just sort of sitting in the room and watching. I didn't really do a whole lot in terms of contributing, but I was reflecting on this, and I think on the one hand that was challenging because there was this sort of gnawing sense within me of like, I should be doing something, I should be doing more. Later on, in my curacy and looking back now, I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to be an observer on the first few months, the first year, because it taught me what to look out for and taught me what to, it gave me a good sense of how a parish priest can hold their authority. I got to see the incumbent, I got to observe how she held her authority, how she led when she chose to be led, how the incumbent handled conflict, how she managed conversation, um, how what her boundaries were and how she managed the boundaries, her vision, her preoccupations, and observing the incumbent and observing the incumbent's relationship to the congregation and the town. Um, it was a very useful, what's the word, mirror maybe, or a very useful um, foil, so that when I observed what was going on, I could think to myself, well, that's working really well. I think I might put that in my toolkit. Or I was like, oh, I would have made a different choice there. Maybe I'll try something different when I have an opportunity to do so. And so all of that sort of relational learning was incredibly valuable. Um, I had an opportunity later in my curacy to take on more leadership in the parish when my supervisor went away on sabbatical. Um, and that was right towards the end, and it was a very nice transition into where I am now because I got to run the affairs of the parish in the interim. So, um, chairing the corporation, planning worship, being the first point of contact for baptisms and weddings and funerals and visits, and all those being in the leader seat suddenly was incredibly helpful learning about my own sense of self. What I mean is how I carry authority, how I act, carry my priesthood around. Um, it gave me a lot of compassion for parish priests because it's easy to sort of sit on the sidelines and criticize what people are doing, but when you're actually in the leader's chair, you realize, oh, okay, well, this is actually really difficult. um, so, yeah, and so a lot of learning about who I am as a leader. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be in that place because it forced me, maybe forced is the wrong word, but it forced me to address a lot of my own expectations, whether they were um, misplaced or correct. Um, I had to uh, learn how to make mistakes or have the courage to try new things. Um, it put me in a position where I really needed to put myself out there, stick my neck out, and try new things, not be afraid, and that was huge for my confidence.
So Peter, this means it's you, and obviously you're going to have a different experience as you're at a different stage of this process. But I'd love to hear a little bit about you and how it's going.
Sure. And Leanne, first of all, thank you for providing this time of conversation today because Frasia and Ben are both dear colleagues of mine, both when we all studied together at Montreal Dio, and it's lovely to hear their thoughts on curacy as I'm just going into the thick of it. So my name is Peter, and yes, I am currently assistant curate at Christ Church Beaurepaire in Beaconsfield, so in the West Island. and I was just ordained as a deacon this October, and I actually began a month earlier as assistant curate. Um, so that's actually it's called a curacy, but I'm technically an assistant curate. There is no curate though. We have an incumbent, but it's still called a curacy for anybody who's curious about the word why we're called curates, because we're actually assistant curates technically. Um, and at least mine is. So I am at Christchurch Board Repair, and I have I'm about a month or 2 months and a half now in to that time, and it's I have to say, oh, as I'm getting going on it, it's been a wonderful time of mentorship where I'm learning a tremendous amount from the incumbent there, uh, and it's Joel, and he's been very gracious about making sure to include me in a lot of things, including corporation meetings, as I think like Ben mentioned earlier, and so that I'll have a bit of a clue about what I'm doing eventually when I am helping lead these. But getting, I'm involved in the worship schedule, preaching, but also now that I'm deacon, doing a lot more liturgical involvement. That is a really important part of my training as I'm uh, learning the rhythms of this. I didn't, particularly for someone who didn't grow up in the Anglican Communion and then who had formation during COVID where we weren't doing things in person. So many of the things that we were doing at the altar, I didn't have a lot of training on. So having this time uh, repetition and getting a sense of familiarity around the altar and with the rhythms of the liturgy is it's already it's becoming part of who I am in worship in a wonderful way, and so I'm really grateful for that as a just as a huge element of my curacy as I'm getting started, just sort of that practical element or the practice of the praxis maybe of what we're doing in worship being becoming part of who I am, and so that's a tremendous gift. I think that is part of the curate's experience is that element of repetition, and and even I mentioned certain preaching, yes, and writing sermons. It's still for me that's takes a large amount of time, and I'm trying as a through practice I'm learning how to do that more efficiently, or trying to anyways, and and that's it's having the space to be able to practice and get feedback too from and learn from watching as well as I learn see what the incumbent does both in worship but also in the planning, how I can be better at what I'm doing by seeing what they do, and that's just a tremendous aspect of, and I would lump that all under mentorship because I'm learning alongside someone who's become a good colleague as well as a mentor, and that's been incredibly helpful. Now, as curate, as full-time curate, able to support the ongoing ministries, but also develop other programs. So that's I think another benefit of having the curate and having this curacy program, whereas I free up time resources both so the incumbent can do additional activities as I'm maybe preaching on a given Sunday or taking some of that, freeing up some of his hours there, but which is a learning experience for me. But then also with some of my time, I can engage in family ministry. We've got this supper club initiative we just began in October, and we're doing that once a month, and that is sort of a way to integrate some of the community engagement part of the pastoral work into my time as a curate, and that's something that it speaks to community engagement as well, not just specifically meeting already existing liturgical roles, but it's possible partially because I'm here as a curate that there's an extra bit of time to be able to put resources to that, and also and continuing with coordinating with other West Island parishes. We've got this youth event that we're planning together, a few of us, and that's also possible because I have a little bit of extra time to be able to spend some resources on that. So that is, I think, yeah, the mentorship, as I mentioned, one of the huge parts, but also just having this time as a curate to be able to spend my resources to help develop community in ways that maybe the existing leadership can't spread themselves too thin to be able to do everything all at once. So many hands make for lighter work. It is still early days, so I'm appreciative of the fact that I've got space to make errors. I'm seeing that already, and these two are already seasoned pros. They don't make any errors anymore. But for me, it's having a mentor who can give me feedback and helps me learn. Oh, what am I doing here? How can I do this better? Or what are the existing practices here? This really is valuable, so that and not just from the incumbent, but from other members of the community too. I'm getting really helpful feedback, even because they understand that I'm in a learning role. I'm also ordained, so it's a learning role with also expectations of certain learning that I've already done, and I'm given a certain amount of responsibilities. But there's also there's also grace in that time that I've just been so grateful for. People giving me helpful feedback in such graceful, wonderful ways that, even just practical things like, oh, you're dropping your voice at the end of these sentences. You might be using a mic where I'm turning around a lot and looking at people and it's losing the volume, but that's technical, but it's really helpful. or just gentle encouragement too. And that's, coming from other lay leaders, from other staff, but particularly from the community itself. The parish has been very generous in their encouragement and support of my learning as I grow in leadership, even just in a short time. So it's exciting to have the opportunity to dive in this way, and particularly the area that I'm seeing has expanded the most is in like liturgical in worship leadership. That's an area where now I'm really have the ability to be much more involved. Reading the gospel and preparing the table, preparing the altar. It's deeply meaningful to be engaged in those parts of our Anglican worship in a way, in such a deep way, and it's exciting to see those things become part of who I am in leadership as well.
Risk is such an important element of making meaningful ministry. There has to be a little element of risk. And I feel like this time being a curate, it's really risky business because you don't know the water. You are like entirely, and you're so alive for ministry. So, Peter, how has risk played a role in your curacy, or in your assistant curate role?
Well, so far, absolutely. The supper club is one example. We just started, and I have to say, also credit my wife Rebecca, who's my partner in leading that, who's tremendous support, and that in making that family ministry happen. But it's risky. We didn't know. I mean, we deliberately made it so we didn't want to require RSVPs because we want it to just be an open invitation. Anybody can come, an open table. So you're preparing food for who knows how many, never knowing how many are going to show up and how things are going to go. So that was very nervous part in specifically in relation to that, and that felt risky because you're stretching the boundaries of what maybe is the community has done, or maybe you're harkening back to. I mean, in this case, we're harkening back to things that they've done in the past as well, or that has been in the memory of community members. So but it's still risky. It's anytime you're encouraging people to step out of the box, it feels you can get feedback for that you want it to go well. But on the other hand, maybe what I think is going to work well doesn't. And I know that's all. And we're also been experimenting in worship too, because we've with our intergenerational services that we do at Christ Church, we've been expanding sort of the scope of that and trying to hone how we can get all ages involved in worship. And we had a great example of that, I think, just this past week, actually, of having youth involved in a great way. But it's tricky because you don't, especially when you have kids involved in worship, you never know how that's going to go. And but it's also really rewarding when you see, I think, those relationships developing, and that's we see with the community building, those relationships between community members, those pastoral relationships, as that's another part. I'm able to do visitation on behalf of the parish now, and bring communion, bring the Eucharist to them, or to just bring the presence, physical presence of their fellow parishioners to them is deeply meaningful. And that, again, that's risky, as you're saying. To anytime you're talking about relationships, it's risky to share, but it's risky sharing about Jesus, and sharing about Christ. That is, our faith is inherently risky, and because it's we're talking about truths that are important to us and important to share too. But it's when you're talking about fundamental beliefs, that can go any number of ways when you're having those kinds of conversations. So it's that's also what makes those rewarding, though, is to have those risky conversations that where you're sharing of yourself, your own faith, your own beliefs, the community's faiths, the community's beliefs, and offering the chance to find space to come together. That is risky when you're offering hospitality, or when you're inviting hospitality, and where you're inviting shared spaces. But it's a joy when we can come together in many different ways.
I think I'm very grateful for my time in my curacy, not only because it was a time for me for formation and finding out who I was in ministry and what kind of ministry I was called to, but really I'm grateful because the time of my curacy was subsidized by the diocese. It was not the parishes that I served that paid that time. And I think it was a gift to me, but also a gift to the communities, because the communities I arrived to would probably not have been able to pay for that time of having clergy, an extra clergy or clergy coming to do the 2 years of curacy that we are gifted by the diocese. So I think it's important to see it from the other perspective too. I'm grateful because it was my time of formation, my time of experiencing ministry, my time of growing with a community. But also for the community perspective, it was a time that was gifted. It's something to be aware of and something to not take for granted either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's such an important investment, right? I mean, where it really highlights the fact that we're a diocesan church, like that. That's the kind of the primary unit in our polity as an Anglican church, and when you invest in people, and that, like, for all that we talk about, what we should and shouldn't be spending money on, people is definitely one of the things that I think it's very worthwhile spending money on, investing in good leadership. And and this is a great example, because you are basically saying to new clergy, go into this parish, open yourself up to the learning that will happen in that experience while you're there. So that's risky, right? I mean, it's all risky stuff, right? It's all relational stuff. Like Peter said, it's being in a relationship with people involves an element of risk. Trusting yourself to a community involves an element of risk, just as your congregation trusting you is also an element of risk for them, because at the end of the day, neither party knows what they're going to get. So you have to kind of,
Can I add also,
yeah.
having been the colleague and friend who's seen both Frasier and Ben go through their curacy first, I loved in our conversations that we had, our private conversations prior to this, when they would talk about those relationships forming with their communities, and you would see them light up when they would talk about their communities and the exciting things that were happening. And it was always about connecting with people that they would get the most excited. And I think that's one of the real gifts of that time of curacy, is getting to see how to make those relationships and the joy that can happen as God works in those times of relation building. It's so just this case, this is not me speaking as a curate, but as a colleague of curates. Seeing that was always a joyful, and hearing about those times of learning and those relationships building was such a joy.
And it's like, yeah, and and I'm thinking now, like, it's a real time for me. It was a real time of like solidifying, like consolidating my identity. I've noticed that I've started to build up a sense of what I believe about prayer, what I believe about worship and preaching and the sacraments.
Well, I would like to thank the group of clergy that have taken the time to just give us a snapshot of what it means and what it's like, and how their experience of the curacy, how it's impacted their ministry and has impacted their ministry in so many wild and wonderful ways. And I'd like to invite you, the listener, to support this ministry by making a donation to the Bishop's Action Appeal. Bishop Mary herself selects the topic for the ministry to support each year, and it would mean so much to Bishop Mary and to the Diocese of Montreal if you would support us this year. So thanks to everyone for everything, and maybe we'll do this again sometime soon.